Hi everybody, meteorologist Joe Chaffee. Welcome to the Joe Chaffee Weather Show on this Friday night, 7:02 p.m. Eastern Time on August the 23rd. And he's coming. He's going to make an entrance, I've been told. I've been told the negotiations were difficult. They were long. They took months to complete. A long list of unreasonable demands. But apparently he's happy now. So actually, he and I were taking just a little bit of a break over the summertime. You get pretty tired doing these shows on a nightly basis and with all the other stuff that both of us are doing. So it was a nice needed break. And now that we got the tropics revving up, I thought this would be a good idea to maybe have him jump on. But apparently, he isn't here yet. Okay. So I'll summarize quickly what is going on with respect to what we're going to be covering tonight. I think we're going to talk, first things first, about the broad low-pressure area that's developed off the Florida coast and what we think is going to happen with that. Conditions are certainly favorable for this system to develop into a tropical depression, and our friends at the National Hurricane Center have said so. With a 90% probability in the next 5 days and a 70% probability in the short term. So we'll go over that, and we also have one of those tropical waves out in the tropical Atlantic, and it looks like a broad low-pressure area has formed out there, well east of the Windward Islands, and it's moving westward, and it's got a narrow area where the upper air winds are on the light side, but if it stays in there, conditions are going to be favorable for that system to develop over the next several days. I know, it's all right. It's your sign. I explained to everybody that after long negotiations that took months, acquiescing to a long list of demands, including you want your water at 41 degrees, apparently.
Something like that,
right?
Yeah.
And you want the molecules flown in from the Sahara and fused on the spot.
All right. All you have to do is just ask me.
I know.
Happy to come on and say hello. Hi.
Well,
nice to see you, Joe.
And goodbye. We back to Yucca Flats after the blast.
Yes, after the blast.
So we. For the summertime, I figured I would take a little bit of a break. How many times can you come on night after night and go showers and thunderstorms, muggy and humid? So now we got some tropical stuff to play with, and I think in the coming weeks we'll be doing many more of these and getting back to normal.
Well, of course, the traditional maximum of or peak of the hurricane season or tropical storm season is September the 10th, and that's not too far off. And we haven't had an overabundance of tropical activity. But we are up to C on the list, and we may very well, in the coming days, see the D storm, Dorian, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I have pictures of I got some radars to look at, satellites, and I figured let's start with the system, what's off the southeast, off the Florida coast.
Okay.
And the satellite loop, as we bring this up full screen here for everybody to see, actually during the day today, Joe, I noticed an increase in convection, especially east of the range of most of the radar, off the range of the Florida radars. But one of the things that I did pick up on when we go to the radar loop, you can see it, even though there's not a whole lot in terms of showers and storms off the immediate coast of Florida, you can definitely see that there's some kind of broad low-level center there because the echoes are all turning counterclockwise.
Right. And while I'm also watching that, I'm also watching in amazement, somewhat of an amazement, right along the west coast of Florida, Venice, for example, and down to the Keys, and how the thunderstorms just literally blow up over the span of the last few hours.
There's probably some kind of sea breeze front over there.
A sea breeze front. I think the sea breeze is probably pushing in from the east and pushing all of that activity over to central and southwest Florida, and that's why you're seeing what you're seeing. But that system, this potential tropical system, certainly looks interesting as well. And it's also interesting to see how some of the various models are handling the future path or track of this system in the days to come.
There also doesn't look to be a whole lot of wind shear going on. If you look at the clouds at the low levels of the atmosphere, you can see, I love these GOES images. You can see the low clouds, you can see the mid-level clouds. Looks like they're all pretty much moving in the same general direction. You don't really see cloud tops being sheared off with strong winds going from west to east. There's an upper low to the east of this, and you kind of see the tail edge of those clouds on the far right. But this seems to be in an environment that is going to be conducive for further development over the next couple of days. And I think that's why Miami, the Hurricane Center, is going with the idea that this will have a good shot of becoming a depression by tomorrow night.
Yeah, and the Hurricane Center came under criticism about a month ago for a system that was down near the Bahamas, and everybody's phones were going off because there was initially the suggestion of some rapid intensification, which never took place, and there was some criticism about why the Hurricane Center, got everybody bent out of shape for something that never amounted to anything.
Oh, that depression that formed,
right.
and then
that little twist.
24 hours later, it was gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But this is the society or the time that we live in, Joe. That what was 20, 30 years ago, you watched very carefully, and now all of a sudden, literally, it's a moment by moment thing. And with the social media and with our smartphones or iPhones, you suddenly get a ping just
Sure.
like that, and you look at it and say, "What is this? I didn't see this yesterday or even last night or whatever." I think it's a very interesting time that we're living in.
As I recall, and I'll double check, I think that depression was right around the time of the 4th of July weekend, and the 4th of July holiday.
Right.
And I think perhaps they were, they had it sort of in the back of their minds that it was the course of least regret to make it a depression
Right.
in case it
Right.
became something. But yeah, I agree with you. It is the era of epic drizzle.
Instant.
Where everything is blown into an Armageddon proportion. And that being said, you look at what was on the satellite, but when you look at what's on the radar, there really isn't a whole lot going on. Even where that sea breeze front was happening,
Right.
there's not a whole lot of shower. There's hardly anything actually.
A lot of thunderheads, I guess, but
Yeah.
nothing coming out of those thunderheads.
But if you watch the motion of the echoes, you could there is a counterclockwise turn. So there's some kind of broad low, and when we start seeing convection develop where it coalesces near a more definable center, that's probably at the point where you're going to see the Hurricane Center do something with it. And I'm showing you the wide radar view here. Now there actually are a couple of storms well south of Tampa, St. Pete, down near Port Charlotte and further south, and there's some storms offshore. So perhaps on the first frame there, Joe, there's you can see the back edge of what looks like almost a line of showers.
Yeah.
So
getting pushed off.
Perhaps the satellite's not kind of matching up exactly with the radar in terms of the time frame. Perhaps it's delayed a little bit. But the bottom line is, there's really not a whole lot going on, other than the fact that there's probably a lot of clouds in terms of what's happening over Florida at the moment. And even if this were to develop, we're talking about a depression that's generally moving northward over the weekend and into early next week. So it'll probably be mainly offshore anyhow, from what we're seeing.
I worked for a private weather forecasting company which did syndicated weather forecasts all across the eastern United States. And one of our clients was WAPE in Jacksonville, Florida. They called themselves, Joe, the Big Ape. If you go down, I don't know, it may be the story down there now, I don't know, but back in the day, in the late 70s, early 80s, we got to learn very quickly that in the summertime, it's always the same thing day in and day out, day after day, and we just had 2 or 3 basic forecasts. We didn't even do a forecast for them. We just looked at the maps and said, okay, use forecast B,
Right.
Showers and thunderstorms, an ongoing threat. Sometimes we'd say sunshine giving way to clouds and thunderstorms by mid and late afternoon. I mean, it was crazy. I don't know how people live down there. I mean, it's just day after day of hot or steamy, oppressive, humid weather with showers and thunderstorms.
I lived in New Orleans for 3 years, and Corpus Christi for 2 others. Although in Corpus Christi was actually mostly dry most of the time in the summertime. But in New Orleans, you could set your clock to a thunderstorm at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon every single day.
I guess
it was swampy. But you know, the tropical humidity that's down in the south is a whole lot different than what happens here, because the air up here doesn't move.
Right.
Down in Florida, there's usually always a breeze of some sort. In Louisiana, it was a bit more swampy, but I got used to it.
That's what I was about to say. I mean, I guess if you live down there and you get used to it after a while, you just take it as it is. I remember covering it was STS-8. It was the very first nighttime launch of the space shuttle in August of 1983. And I got to tell you, folks, this was my first time going down to Florida in the summertime, the late summer, and Joe, I thought the humidity and the intensity of the sun and the humidity
it hurts.
was like 2 to 3 times worse than anything I ever experienced up here in the New York metropolitan area.
Yeah. Well, you got this frontal boundary now. Last night's cold front, which incidentally, I had a lot of trees down near me, damage all over the place. I usually have a straight line shot when I get off the highway right to my house. Two left turns and I'm home. Well, I had to go through a whole bunch of side and back roads just to go 1 3/4 miles because there were trees down and streets were closed off, power lines were down. Parts of Long Island got hit very hard. Wind gusts. Unofficially, I saw some folks with the 80-mile-an-hour plus wind gusts probably a good downburst when that storm went through last night, which was you usually don't get severe weather here after sunset. It does happen sometimes, but you usually, if you're going to get it, you're going to have your thunderstorms roll through in the late afternoon and evening. Well, I think this was the first time all summer that we actually had them come through after sunset, and actually they rolled through around 10 or 11 o'clock. They were unbelievable. Now, that boundary, by the way, is now offshore, just kind of waiting for this one last wave of low pressure that's moving off the Delaware coast now, and that it's pulling in the dry air that's up to the north, and we're going to get that dry air finally in here for Saturday and for at least part of Sunday, and we'll come back to that in a second. I want to go to finish off the tropics. I just want to, by the way, folks, a lot of showers and storms scattered around all across the Gulf states back through Texas. You're certainly getting a saturation of tropical moisture all through the Gulf states at the moment because of this frontal boundary. But I want to come back to, there's Chantal, okay, and it is, it's barely a depression. I'm using the enhanced satellite loop so you can actually see the thunderstorm that is in there. I'll add a few extra frames, but it's out in the middle of the Atlantic. The system is been basically drifting southward. It's almost gone, and it probably will be gone shortly. But you can watch what happens today. There's some shear going on. You get a thunderstorm that tries to flare up near the circulation center, and that's it. I mean, it almost looks like smoke coming out of one house. Right. But it's gone. But to me, when this storm formed out of the frontal boundary that was here earlier in the week, was probably a solid signal from the atmosphere, from the tropics, saying, "Okay, it's time. It's time. I've got all this latent heat that's built up, and we have to get it released, and we have to get it redistributed in the northern latitudes."
Exactly.
And that's probably why we suddenly have a couple of systems. I got the wide shot here, and on the lower right, not all the way in the corner, but the wave that's furthest to the west, that a low has developed there, and you can actually see there's some curvature. This system, I think, has a shot of developing. There's a narrow area where the upper air winds are pretty reasonable in terms of being light enough. So this might also become a tropical depression. Straight to the north of that, all the way to the top, you can see what's left of Chantal as it just sort of spins away and drifts south. The upper low that's between the Chantal and the system over Florida, and that's all those clouds that are just getting blown away to the east and southeast. And then, of course, the system that's off the Florida coast. And you've got some, yesterday we were talking about, I don't have the wide enough shot here, but a lot of a big buildup of clouds in the central Gulf. There's an upper low in the central Gulf. Those thunderstorms weaken, and there's some convection flaring up late this afternoon, this evening in the western Gulf. So that upper low has moved to the west. So it's starting to get busy, and we'll have some tropical systems to talk about. So let's bring up the.
We're coming up on now in the next week. I think it'll be the 8th anniversary of Irene from 2011.
Yes.
That was a late August system.
Well, yesterday was the 50th anniversary of Camille. Camille
was the storm, the benchmark storm that everything else was matched against until I guess we had Andrew.
Yes.
And Hugo a close second in 1988. Andrew, I think, was in 92. Yeah, we've seen some rather potent systems down in that southeastern section of the nation over the last.
Well, Camille went right into Gulfport, Mississippi, and just ripped them apart.
Right.
I think I still have the original teletyped advisories from actually right off the teletype.
Wow.
I have them somewhere in my house, buried in a box someplace. But let's talk about this weekend. Let's talk about this low that's going to be off the Florida coast, and all the models have this. Now, we of course are going to be benefiting from this nice big 1026 millibar high over Lake Superior that's going to move fairly quickly to New England by the time we get to Saturday night, Sunday. But we should be in good shape tomorrow, even though the winds are going to be going around as the day goes by to more northeasterly and then eventually to easterly. I think we're going to have a fine and dandy day. The frontal boundary is far enough south where there's no issue. And by the way, if you look down in Florida over land, the GFS at least has some kind of surface low in South Florida, and I think that makes sense considering what we're seeing on the radar.
Yes. You're going into some long, long explanations. What more can I possibly add? You've covered virtually everything here in terms of
you just sit there, activity. Just sit there in complete admiration. Now, what's the deal for Sunday? Because I was having a little bit of trouble with this. You got this frontal boundary to the south. You've got this high now that's going to be even further east, north of Nova Scotia. Easterly winds. You wonder, and you're also going to have an upper air disturbance overhead. And we're talking about the whole area from, say, eastern PA to southern New England. We're going to probably have at least some clouds coming in.
Yeah. Well, the upper level disturbance probably is going to help to generate afternoon convective clouds.
And we can show it here.
And in this type of a weather pattern, I use the term self-destruct sunshine because basically it is the sun that's going to lead to the imminent downfall of fair skies by Sunday afternoon by heating the atmosphere up, making the atmosphere more unstable, those bubbly cumulus clouds, plus, as you point out, with the onshore flow, maybe a lower layer of stratus or ocean clouds coming in. So as we've been saying for the last few days, if you have any outdoor plans or you want to go somewhere outdoors with a lot of sunshine, most definitely it looks like Saturday as opposed to Sunday as being the better day. Although both days, regardless of cloud cover or sunshine, both days will still be very comfortable as opposed to the muggy, sticky air that we've been dealing with for much of this week.
And this is another example. This whole summer, I think, actually from probably early June, we've had the Canadian jet has been there, northwest to southeast, and every once in a while it would buckle where it goes further south, and been getting these shots of dry air, and then it pulls up north, and then we get very warm to borderline hot and humid. And this is another example. As it buckles southward, the short wave that's coming through tonight into Saturday, what's happening is the upper trough is pulling out, but it's leaving a piece behind across New England and back into Pennsylvania and Ohio. So that's the little upper air disturbance that's sitting overhead Sunday morning into early afternoon, which is going to create the instability. Now going forward, that's going to pull out. And we've got another trough coming into the northern plains, but I want to go back to the tropical system, and I'm going to we'll do a little painting. Because I just want to touch on the fact, what if the tropical system does what if it does develop out
into
of that
Dorian,
into a tropical storm?
Yeah.
What's the scenario along the East Coast at the moment?
At the moment, I think it looks rather gray, Joe, but that's
Yes. Hang on. So I've got, this is for Tuesday morning. This is the upper airflow at 18,000 feet. I think this is probably a good measure, a good layer to look at as far as steering is concerned. And when we look at the upper air winds, we've got an upper low that's north of Minnesota. So, your winds are going to be counterclockwise around the upper low. But if you follow this along, the winds along the East Coast, they're not really very strong, but they definitely have a southwesterly component to them. So if we wind up with a tropical system out here, it would, to me, it would say you're going to probably try to take something out northeast, parallel to the coastline, and not really have any kind of serious impact in terms of the actual day-to-day weather along the southeast coast, and certainly for points north of us. I would think that there should not be any issues here with an upper flow like this.
Well, the only issue might be if the storm does get its act together and develops into something like a strong tropical system or a Category 1 hurricane. Its proximity to the eastern seaboard certainly would mean an increase in rip currents and sea swells,
Right.
and that would probably be from the mid-Atlantic, from let's say Hatteras on north. So if you have next week off and you're saying to yourself, boy, I'm going to hit the beach, for at least a few days, keep in mind that maybe by Wednesday or Thursday of next week, they may be posting the red flags for the potential of an undertow or rip currents because of the offshore antics of what could become Tropical Cyclone Dorian.
Now, what I think saves us, by the way, if we look at this flow, right in here, there looks like there's this little shortwave, and the European has the same thing. And it's this little shortwave that actually keeps the flow very, very broad. If that wasn't there, you might have a different situation. I'm going to put the map back up clean, and we'll show it. So let's say this shortwave here wasn't there.
Right.
You might want, instead, you could probably have an upper flow that was maybe a bit more like this, where instead of being southwesterly along the East Coast, it would be a little bit more southwesterly or
Right.
southerly. The other thing that's saving us too is the fact that this upper air disturbance, this bottom part of this trough that's getting left over for Saturday night and Sunday, well, the elements of that are still around east of Nova Scotia right here.
Right.
So that is actually helping to suppress things and keeping the flow more southwest and light southwest enough that it opens up an alleyway of escape for any kind of, for something to develop.
Right. And, as I said at the onset, we are, I guess you could say the middle part of August into the middle part of October is the key, 2-month interval for tropical activity. I remember Dr. Neil Frank, I did an interview with him, the former director of the National Hurricane Center, back in the 1980s, and he said, the season begins on June 1st, but July is always a slack month. Most of August usually is kind of flat. It's not until late August and September that everything starts to jump, and I think we'll be seeing that. Was it last year? I think, yeah, it was last year where we were commenting, it had been so dull up to a certain point, and then all of a sudden there was an explosion.
Yeah.
We had 6, 7, 8 tropical
Something
systems
like
in
that. It was
September.
one after another
It
after
could very
another.
well happen this year.
All the way
couldn't
up through Michael in early October.
Right.
Going into next week, one of the keys to the forecast, I think, for our area, if we wind up seeing a system here that gets fairly well developed, that actually might help keep things. My idea was if you wind up developing a tight tropical system here that moves off to the northeast, that basically tightens up the moisture, and it could wind up leaving us a little drier
Right.
going into Tuesday, and that we'll have to wait for this next weather system, this weak front that comes along about Wednesday, to bring some showers. Now, if the GFS is correct, and you've got this broad low, if you, instead of having a tropical system, the GFS just has this sort of broad low that wants to move up the East Coast. If it remains like that, where it never really gets into some wound up tight little system, then you could have clouds coming in here later Monday and have to deal with showers as early as maybe mid to late Tuesday.
Here's the problem, I think, at least from my own personal perspective, is that this is the first summer now that we are relying on the new GFS model.
Right.
Yet we have access to the old model called the legacy model on the Tropical Tidbit site.
Right.
We don't have as many things to look at or available to us on the legacy site. But this is going to be the first year that we're going to be dealing with tropical systems using the new GFS. And going into the wintertime, you get used to a certain model over a number of years, but now we have to go through the idiosyncrasies of this new model and see how this model is going to help to react to or to handle tropical systems.
And I just pulled up the legacy GFS for everybody to see. The legacy GFS has, I haven't really been keeping track of this. The legacy GFS does eventually develop a kind of wound up little low there, and it takes it out well to the east. This is not that different from the European, where the European has an even tighter low offshore, but they all have offshore tracks. By the way, all the hurricane forecast models have offshore tracks.
Right.
So it looks like this is pretty much a done deal. The other thing I noticed in terms of the long term, Mr. Rayo, is that so we get this front on Wednesday, and then it looks like it might get warm and somewhat humid toward the end of next week. But there's another front that maybe comes through here at some point during the Labor Day weekend. So maybe we have another high coming down and another shot of slightly drier air for the last vacation weekend of the summer season.
The unofficial end of summertime. Can't believe Labor Day is looming. I remember many years ago, David Letterman, we were coming up on Labor Day. It was about a week before Labor Day, and he said, "You always know Labor Day is right around the corner when Jerry Lewis applies the first coat of lacquer to his head."
That's
quite true. Jerry Lewis. I can't believe Jerry's been off for 10 years now. Just about 10 years. I really miss him in that television.
I happen to be working at one of my other television stations many years ago, where they did a satellite interview with Jerry Lewis. And it was, well, let's just say he was a little difficult, just ever so slightly difficult. By the way, with the next system, one of the things I noticed, I mentioned this yesterday, and one of the things I noticed, you talking about the old GFS versus the new GFS and everything else. The upgrades that have been done to the new GFS, and I think they may have done an upgrade on the Canadian. I have to find out, but this is usually a point where either one or both models are usually spinning up Category 5 hurricanes all over the place.
Right.
They have not been doing that. So
let me remind you.
They've been occasionally putting little pieces here and there, but in terms of like wholesale spinning the entire Atlantic basin, they haven't been doing that.
There was back at the very beginning of this month in August, for several days, like the 356-hour model or whatever like that. I mean, we're talking about 12 and 14 days out, folks. They actually had something akin to a Category 4 or 5 storm.
Right, they did it on one of them.
It was one after another. And like you say after a while, my God, they're still doing it. You figure as you're getting further down the line and closer to the event. But then all of a sudden, it just disappeared. I said, what happened? Where's the storm?
By the way, as far as the second system is concerned, the GFS picks up on it at roughly at about 9, and it's pretty far south actually. It's at 9.5 north and about 44.25 west. It's a 10-10 low that you see there, and it does have a sort of very tight, small little circulation moving across the northern Windward, southern Leeward Islands, and then dragging it into the northeast Caribbean. The upper pattern with a ridge in the Atlantic, the east-west ridge, and the fact that it's so far south probably does favor this to go westward for at least for quite a while, and probably getting into the Caribbean, so that when they get into the Eastern Caribbean, a lot of times there's always wind shear in the Eastern Caribbean, and they don't tend to hold together very well. But that's what we could see at least from the second system, as far as what models are doing with it.
I don't know why I just thought of this as you were doing that discussion or whatever. I'm thinking back to when I got started in this business in the late 70s and into the 80s, and you'd wait on the hurricane discussion and the forecast, which at those days only went out to 72 hours.
The secret prog.
And exactly, they said for intergovernmental use only. You were not supposed to translate this or transmit this beyond certain. I mean, you certainly weren't supposed to put it on the air. And now, of course, we've got hurricane progs readily available on the internet, going out 5 days, and you have people saying
5 days, 10 days, 15 days. a week from Wednesday at 1:10.
Yes.
By the way, the upper pattern for late August, early September is amplified to some degree. You got this nice, trough ridge up in the west, ridging up into Greenland, which is one of the reasons why we keep getting these cold fronts and the shots of cool air. And again, as we look at this on a day-to-day basis, the upper pattern has been pretty much the same that it's been for the last 2.5 months.
Right.
And you actually have blocking up in Greenland that's as we go into early September. We've had stretches of blocking all summer long.
And that's why the blocking that's been occurring over Greenland, especially one a couple of weeks ago, where you were reading perhaps in your newspapers about record heat in Greenland.
Yes.
Maybe that's why.
Maybe that's why he wanted to buy it.
Maybe that's why the president wants to drive it.
So that pretty much covers it as far as what's weather-wise, what's going on. Before we even, I want to hit the chat board because we got some time tonight. But before we do that, let's just come back really quick. I want to just do a couple of more maps. First off, for tonight. And if you're watching and there's severe weather risk in your area, as always, remember, go to weather.gov, because if you are looking at this at 7:33 Eastern Time, if you're watching this on a replay, it's obviously dated. But we still have risks going on this evening with some severe weather in Southern Virginia and North Carolina, where we have working severe thunderstorm watch there. 2 severe thunderstorm watches up from the Texas-Oklahoma Panhandle up the Rockies and into the westernmost plains, with slight risk of severe weather being indicated by the Storm Prediction Center. And I always like to look at our friends from WPC with the 7-day rainfall forecast map. I find this map to be a useful tool because you get a good sense. They do a good job in terms of forecasting general rainfall amounts, but it gives you a good flavor for what the pattern is. And if you're talking about a stalled front across the mid-Atlantic states and on southward, then you would expect to see a rain profile like this, which is pretty solid along the Carolinas and down to Florida and across much of the Gulf states. And meanwhile, in the Northeast, with our nice big high in there, rainfall amounts, the darkest green is a 1/2 inch. So most of the Northeast is in the lighter green, which is between a tenth of an inch. So most of the Northeast is in between a tenth and a quarter of an inch over the next 7 days. So it looks like we're going to have a dry stretch. Wet in the Great Lakes, wetter in the northern plains, and just about bone dry in the west.
I used to try to do back in the day when we used to get fax maps. I'd take my big banana pens out and try to color them,
I remember,
to indicate, how much. And this is so much better than the coloring contours. You could just see in a glance.
Sure. Look, think of all the money you save on magic markers.
Exactly.
All right, let's join everybody on the chat board tonight, and we've got Julianne Steele watching from Nova Scotia, Canada. She's on from time to time, watches our show on a semi-regular basis. It's nice to see you on, Julianne. And I guess you should probably keep an eye on developments with this low off the Florida coast, because if it's going to take a track northeastward offshore, there's always the chance that it could come closer to
Right.
Nova Scotia and Newfoundland sometime around the middle part of next week. But I'll be taking a look at that possibility over the weekend. Howard Vanderhoff says hi. And so does
Hi,
Jason Schaefer. I'm just running back to see if there are any questions for you.
Nova Scotia is a beautiful place. I've been there a couple of times. You got to go. And
It's on my list, and I want to go to Newfoundland also.
Newfoundland, I've been there too. When you go to Newfoundland, look for the puffins. They have puffins.
Yes,
in Newfoundland.
I've seen. By the way, I don't know if you have. Do you have Netflix?
No. Maybe my daughter.
You just barely have an iPhone.
Well, Joe, I don't watch much TV to begin with.
Well, this you should. This is actually quite good. Netflix has a series right now with Sir David Attenborough.
Yes.
And it's called The Hunt, and it's about the relationship in nature of the. And it's not about the movie that got all that's not being released. That's a different one. This is about nature, predators and prey
Yeah.
in nature, and it's so beautifully shot. They take you to all different spots around the world.
Can I just tell you that I spent a summer, I think it was the summer of 1973, at the Hall of Science in Flushing. I had a summer job there, and it was my duty to play all these movies in the Science Theater from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock. And a lot of these movies that I had to rack up on the film projector must have come from Great Britain, because they all had, the narrators had British accents, and it was very much like what you just described.
Right.
You know, Gibbons, you know?
Yes, yes.
That kind of stuff. Well, you know, the thing, that kind of... And one of the films I couldn't understand, you know, you would actually see like a deer being eaten by a lion. I'm saying to myself, why did they do anything? Why did the photographer stop this? You know, it's...
Well, the lion's got to eat too,
Yeah,
you know.
I know. Well,
Scott Briller and Julianne Steele, thank you so much for hitting Super Chat tonight. Really, really appreciate it. It gets us a couple of cups of coffee, and
yes.
that's a good thing.
I don't drink coffee.
A cup of tea?
A cup of tea.
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
A big thing of tea.
Yeah.
2 teas. Chuck Cardillo, who's in the Catskills, and he's here every night, and he's on my Patreon platform too. He says, I'm to tell you that it's great to see you back, that you and I make a terrific pair.
Oh, well, thank you. Now, people sometimes ask me, I was up not this year, but last year, at a stargazing convention in Vermont, and not a few people came up to me and said, please tell Joe Chiappi we love the Joe and Joe show. And I was amazed. I mean, I was like in the middle of nowhere in central New England, and people are watching us up there as well. It's weird.
We've got reach.
Yes, we're everywhere.
We touch people's lives.
Yes. Hopefully we can continue.
Kay Nay, I believe, is watching from Houston, Texas tonight.
Oh.
And I know Kay has been on before, and we welcome you back. Elizabeth Harrison is on from upstate New York. Nice to see you on there. Okie AG from Oklahoma.
Yes.
Always keeping me on tabs of what's the weather like down there when they go through their huge wet spells, followed by their huge dry spells. And I think he's getting... he's in one of those. He's been in one of those wet spells certainly this spring and summer. What are okay? James NASCAR fans had straight line winds go through North Belmore, Long Island last night. Torrential rains and lightning and thunder. They had a lot of damage last night from that cell.
Well, there's one
developed.
building. There was one brick building, I think, that really, like, the whole side of the building was taken down. And somebody said on one of our reports on Fios 1 News that, it was a tornado. It was a tornado, whatever. No, not necessarily. It was more like probably a microburst or straight line winds.
Yeah.
And I don't think the National Weather...
They had us at a marginal risk for severe weather.
Right.
And it was basically... It was a cluster of storms, sort of a line of them, but there was more of a cluster. That was what it looked like. And it was one gigantic big thunderstorm in the middle that moved right over the island. Javon Perry and Chuck Cardillo, you were talking about Irene before. Irene, for Chuck up in the Catskills, said that Irene did a lot of damage there. They had gusts over 90 miles an hour. And, the mountains, and certainly in the Hudson Valley, we've seen situations like this where the wind becomes a much bigger factor than you realize.
Right.
Even though you have tropical systems, normally the winds would be stronger on the coast, but oftentimes here, because of our topography, you get that northwest wind, and it can howl, and has.
Right. Well, in 1999, we had the remnants of Hurricane Floyd come through the Hudson Valley, and we had places like Yorktown Heights in northern Westchester record like a foot of rain out of that system, and that suddenly became the local new benchmark, and that stood until Irene came along, and I don't have an official estimate as to how much fell at my place. I live up in Putnam County. But my wife put out a jug, which had to be at least 12 inches high. We use that for soft drinks, beverages, or whatever like that. And when it was all over said and done, the jug was overflowing. So we too had like over a foot of rain where we were. And Irene, for me, Irene was actually more devastating than Sandy. That may sound kind of strange, but while we did get some trees down in my neighborhood from Sandy, Irene did a ton more damage in terms of just plain flooding. Water, nobody seems to realize until it actually is happening, water does a tremendous amount of damage.
Oh,
that
God,
they-
yes. Atomic Fox saying it's unseasonably cool in the Midwest. Yes, enjoy it. It's a lot better. It's a lot better than those stretches where you get to dew points of 75 or higher for days on end.
Right. Well, we get those those kind of breaks. They never do down in the southeast or the Southland area. But then again, as we mentioned at the onset of the show, you get used to it.
Yeah. All right. So what? John Boy Entertainment Center says Hurricane Arthur was the worst hurricane I ever got hit by. I'm trying to which are Hurricane Arthur because there's been so many. What year was that? Because I don't remember.
I don't know.
And I don't know what part of the country you're John Boy Entertainment Center. I don't know. You're new, so certainly welcome to my YouTube channel and welcome to the chat board. But I'd be curious where exactly you are, so we can maybe comment on. I don't remember.
I remember
there was an Arthur, but I don't remember.
I remember Arthur about 5 or 8 years ago, and we had a storm that had coincided closely with the 4th of July holiday. But that couldn't have been what he's referring to.
He's 2014 in New Brunswick, Canada.
Okay. All right. Well,
I'll do a quick look up. You.
That was probably the one in early July that affected us, but may have wound up making more of a direct hit on the Canadian Maritimes, and as a result, that's why he said that. I do remember an Arthur from 5-7 years ago.
I'm going to try to look it up. I found,
You could always go on Wikipedia, Joe, and just type in Hurricane Arthur 2014.
Hurricane Arthur.
Treacher.
Fish and chips. Or Murray. Hurricane Arthur. This says, let's see, Hurricane Arthur, 2014, July 1st formation, dissipated July 9th.
Right, okay.
Got to 100 miles an hour. It said, okay, so in Canada and Quebec, hurricane force gusts associated Arthur's remnants produced widespread damage, countless trees and power lines, leaving more than 300,000 without power. Damaging the power grid in Nova Scotia was regarded as the worst since Hurricane Juan in 2003. Efforts to restore and repair infrastructure were prolonged. Thousands without power 10 days after the storm, et cetera, et cetera. So here's a... Boy, this actually came pretty close to the North Carolina coast.
I remember that because, and I think we even got some rain out of this, I think right around the 4th of July.
Actually did make landfall in North Carolina near Shackleford Banks.
Right.
And then it turned northeast, weakening as it passed by near Cape Cod and Nantucket.
Right.
Usually they have a track map.
Right.
It is.
Yeah, we were concerned.
So it actually passed. It passed in that stretch where we wind up seeing very little out of it.
For a while there, we were very concerned about what it might bring or whatever like that. But as you can see, once it passed us, it went right up the west side of Nova Scotia.
Let me bring it up. Hang on. Where is it? Sorry, folks. So this was the track of Hurricane Arthur back in 2014, and this was a July Category 2 hurricane,
right.
And those don't happen too often. But you certainly saw something that skimmed the North Carolina coastline, and then remnants going all the way up into east of Labrador.
Right.
It's amazing.
Right.
All right, let me bring this back down. I'll keep the window in the corner. We'll keep it... Oh, no, wrong one. Where are you? There you go.
I don't know, but the food must have been delivered a little while ago.
Oh, did you order food?
No, it's Friday.
Oh, that's right. It's Pizza Friday. I ate... I had the lunch pizza, and I had a little bit more late in the afternoon, so I'm not hungry. I may just grab a little bit of a salad. All right, did you eat?
Yeah, I had a slice and a couple of chicken wings or whatever.
Julianne Steele says she swears... Oh, well, actually, I have... Julianne, I have posted it this way, that you and I are like the two guys at the balcony on the Muppets. Elizabeth Harrison asks you, what causes those loudest cracking sounds during thunder?
Well, thunder is just simply the lightning that you see is kind of like almost like a static electricity bolt. When you hear the thunder, that's simply the rapid expansion of the air in the vicinity of the lightning bolt that causes that rumbling effect. It's not, two gods, having a bowling match.
Clouds crashing into each other.
Clouds crashing into each other, or whatever. Now, that's simply the thunder is simply the expansion of the atmosphere, because the lightning is what, 50,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the lightning bolt.
Yes.
And so if you heat the atmosphere up within a matter of a heartbeat to 50,000 degrees, there's going to be a bit of a noise that's made.
Chuck Cardillo, since we're on hurricane reminiscing mode, he brings up Donna.
Donna was.
Whoops.
I vaguely remember Donna. Donna occurred when I was like 4 years old.
And I was one. I was 1960, so yeah. I was 1.5.
Yes.
I have pictures of me when I was 1.5, but this was the track of Hurricane Donna. I'll bring it up full screen for everybody.
Again, I vaguely remember that. In fact, I was just talking about an hour or two ago with some of the folks back in the newsroom about the fact that I was on one of the very last episodes of the kids' TV show Howdy Doody, which went off the air in September of 1960. I must have been on in August of 1960, sitting in the peanut gallery. And, of course, just a few weeks after that came Hurricane Donna. I vaguely remember...
And I think, Donna, one of the standout things about Hurricane Donna is the fact that it made landfalls on the U.S. It actually made landfall 3 times, once in South Florida, the second landfall in North Carolina, and the third landfall right near New York City.
Right, and in fact, you can go on YouTube. Of course, all of you are on YouTube right now, and all you have to do is type in Hurricane Donna newsreel, and you can see the newsreel footage of Hurricane Donna and the devastation that it did to Coney Island and Lower Manhattan. And Joe, when Sandy took place back in 2012 and flooded out many of those same areas, and you heard, for example, many people say, "This is the first time this ever happened. We never saw anything like this before, the flooding and everything." Go back and take a look at what Donna did to us in 1960. And it wasn't a picnic, let me tell you that.
Summy Girl at 5, welcome to the YouTube channel, and thank you for welcome to my YouTube channel, and thank you very much for hitting a super chat. We can get a candy bar now.
Oh, lovely.
Which is great. There was some. Oh, we have to answer. See, I get such a Jess Harden, since you already know, because I have told you that I don't really get into the long range. I have this theory, people sit around when they hear weather in terms of a gossipy nature. I heard, and then fill in the blank.
Have we already had somebody posting a long range?
Well, Jess Harden says, I heard that we are going to have a cold fall and snowy winter in north central Alabama. Is this true? Jess. Okay, look, if you get one snowfall during the winter, there's your snowy winter in northern Alabama in most years. A. B. All right, so I'm kind of curious. Where did you hear this? Who did you hear this from? Because I'm just kind of curious as to where you heard this. I'm thinking you didn't hear it at the bowling alley or wherever.
Well, in the next, I think next week, the Farmer's Almanac is going to come out with their projection as to what the winter is going to be like, followed by the Old Farmer's Almanac. They usually wait until like the beginning of September. So those two publications. Now, this is interesting. I gave a talk last Saturday, a library talk at the North Babylon Library.
Yes.
About long-range forecasts and whether or not there's a planetary connection. And I mentioned the fact that last year, for the first time in many years, these two almanacs, the regular Farmer's Almanac is the one with the orange cover, the Old Farmer's Almanac is the one with the bright yellow cover, and they diverged last year. The one with the orange cover, the regular Farmer's Almanac, said we were going to have a teeth-chattering, snowy winter. And the Old Farmer's Almanac said, no, we're going to have a milder and wetter winter. And I asked people in the audience, I said, so what do you think was the case? What did we have? And many people raised their hand with the teeth-chattering winter. Not too many raised their hand when I asked if you thought it was a mild winter or wet winter. And I said, well, guess what? In a way, they were both right. Because last year we had a very warm December and January, a very cold February, but it still balanced out as a winter that averaged 1.2 degrees above normal. So The Old Farmer's Almanac was correct. On the other hand, in late January through February, you had these bouts coming down from Canada where you had wind chills of 70 below zero in the Midwest, and we had quite a few days of near zero or 10-degree
remember,
weather.
sure.
A lot of people kind of remember
that it warmed up and rained.
Yeah, they kind of that's right. Every time we got
warmed
frigid,
up and rained.
Every time
it was the opposite of a couple of winters back where we were incredibly warm, and then every time we got precip, it got cold, and we had big snowstorms. What was it, 17, 18?
Right.
But we set all-time record highs for the month of February and had a 10 to 15 inch blizzard the next day.
Right, 60 degrees I think in Central Park, and the next day you're right.
It was in the teens.
Conditions.
Yeah, it's all perception. And I've told you a number of times, Joe, when I've given my talks, and I've always asked the question, how many folks think that it snowed, especially for those that are our age. How many of you think that it actually snowed more when you were younger than it has in the last 30 years? And almost all the time, I would say, if not everybody says when they were kids versus the last 30 years. That's usually the answer. They'll all put up their hands. Oh yeah, definitely when I was a kid. And when I tell them it's exactly the opposite,
right?
They bar. It's all about perception.
It's stunned.
It's all about perception. All winters, I don't know. I guess your mind just sort of always gravitates to the things that make you happy. And if snow makes you happy, you're going to remember those instances. Plus, you were shorter, so a 3-inch snowstorm always seemed to be something that went up to your knees or your waist. Here's a fair question from Scott Briller, and I think it's a legitimate one. Central Park so far this year, 14 days above 90, which is, could we have seen our last 90-degree day? Now, I think I mentioned yesterday that given where we are in the calendar, it is quite possible that yesterday was, for a lot of spots, may have been the last 90-degree day.
I would agree. We may have a bunch of 80s, but I don't think it's going to be kind of tough. I think, at least in the upper level wind pattern that I looked at, that we're going to be hitting 90 with any frequency. Of course, look where we are, Joe. We're coming down to the end of August now. So once we get into September, it's tough. Although I do remember the year before I got married, my wife and I were looking for reception halls in early September, and we went through a stretch where this is 1983 now, where it was like 90 to 95 in early September for several days running. I remember telling one of the guys at the reception hall. He said, "Well, why did you choose September to get married?" I said, "Well, usually we think it's much cooler, and here we are with a pair of cut-off shorts."
Serena S., I'm in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. She says, "I thought this was about the tropical storm that had a 90% chance of hitting me on the 30th." Okay, first off, we're 55 minutes into this live stream, so we talked all about the system off the Florida coast early on. Second of all, the 30th is a week from now, and this thing will be long gone by then. And also, even if it develops on top of you in terms of a tropical depression, I don't know how much you're going to wind up getting there right in Florida, because most of the stuff is offshore. But go back to the beginning after we're done and take a look at it, because this is, at least with what's there now, I'm not really overly concerned about what might happen in Florida, or for that matter, in most of the places up the East Coast. The way things look right now, it looks like it would primarily be offshore anyway. And Chuck Cardillo says the Old Farmer's Almanac came out today, and for the Northeast it says it's going to be wet and wild.
Oh, they came out already at the Old Farmer's Almanac.
He said it came out today.
Yeah. Well, that's it. They used to come out in early September, but I think now that what they're trying to do is they're trying to beat the other almanac.
Scott Briller wants to know how can they follow you?
Follow me doing what?
Okay. So Joe, now actually they finally got him on the iPhone. We have him typing. We have him on a computer, which is good.
Before that, Joe, just looking now at the experimental 3 to 4 week projection by the Climate Prediction Center, this takes it out to September 7th to the 20th, and they have our section of the country in the above normal line, pretty good percentage.
Solid above normal.
So
and solid below normal on precip.
So if you believe this is September could turn out to be a rather warm to hot and maybe dry month.
Ridge in the east. We've been getting Septembers like that every year for the last I don't know how many years.
Yes.
So Scott, Scott, as far as what he says, follow. Where can he find you on social media and other places?
Well, I mean, I have my Facebook page. I post a lot of interesting weather information, at least 2 or 3 times a day on that. This is going to go on the weather page, my Facebook page, after we're done in about 2 hours. And sometimes I do occasionally a live Facebook, either from my iPhone in a special weather situation, or I have a camera on my computer at home, and I'll do a discussion here. I have to get the what is it, OBS or
the OBS? Yes, because and I've already addressed this on here, and I'll just mention it briefly, and we don't have to talk about it now in any kind of detail. But the folks know that that our time at FiOS is limited now. Well, we only got about 80 some odd days left because it is going to be shut down by Verizon, and in the meantime, we're gonna now that we're going into the Labor Day weekend, we're gonna do the Joe and Joe show, and when that's done, hopefully, if we could work out the technicals, and I don't see why we can't. We probably should be able to continue the Joe and Joe show from our respective homes,
right?
Where I'll be at my house, you'll be in your house, and we'll Skype it in back and forth.
Right.
So we're going to work out those details, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. So that's the plan at the moment.
Right.
In the meantime, we're going to be doing this, on a semi-regular basis, and get back to the old schedule as we go through the rest of the next slightly less than 3 months.
Right. In fact, our supposed last day here is the 1-year anniversary of that odd snow event that we had just last year.
I wonder if which kind of leads me to ask the question of whether they're gonna do the same thing last year, and that is salt roads when the temperatures were 50 degrees. Do you remember how they were just going They were salting.
We told the story. We know what they do. They budget for the winter and snow starting in December, and they don't do anything in November because they just assume that we don't have November snowstorms. But they learned a hard lesson last year that yes, we can have snow in November, and yes, that snow can accumulate more than just a little coating to a rather significant amount. What else can we say?
Exactly. And they overreacted in the other direction as they went through the whole winter. That every time, there was the daily state of emergency in the state of New Jersey. But the consequences of that, by the way, are that the roads around here are unbelievably horrible. Right. They came out with some story today that in terms of the quality of roadways, New Jersey and New York State are 1 and 2. Number 1 and number 2, New Jersey having the worst roads in the U.S. and New York State the second worst roads. And it's no doubt. I don't know how my car still holds together with all the potholes I hit on a daily basis.
Yeah. And meanwhile, the state that's right next door to us, to the east, Vermont, for a number of years I did the forecast for the state highway department of Vermont. I used to talk to a guy, I forget his name now. He had a very laid-back voice, and I tell him, he said, well, places around Springfield up to Rutland, they're going to have about 20 inches of snow. He's just like, well, that's Vermont weather. And they always kept the roads very, very
clean. Yeah.
They were excellent.
Well, upstate, they never close, the lake effect, they hardly ever close schools up there. The same up in northern New England. It snows. It melts. And snow melts.
Exactly.
All right, look, it's 8:01. We've been at it for an hour. I think that was a nice, good comeback that we've had. Thanks very much, everybody, for being here tonight. And Joe and Joe will make it. We'll be on semi-regular going forward. In the meantime, let me just give you a heads up. Since we do have a tropical system in play for the weekend, possibly, I'll be doing a live stream at some point tomorrow and some point on Sunday. In fact, I definitely will do one Sunday because I'm working Sunday,
right.
So I'll be here. So definitely will have a Sunday live stream, and I'm going to try and do a live stream for tomorrow. So just watch for that, especially Patreon members. You'll get your heads up. I always give you guys about 3 hours, 2 to 3 hours lead time, so you can jump on the chat board a little bit early. Other than that, have a great weekend, and thanks for being here tonight on the YouTube version of the Joe and Joe Weather Show.
And my wife has an idea that sometime over this weekend, either tomorrow or maybe more likely Sunday, we will make our annual sojourn up to the Dutchess County Fair. And so if you're in that neighborhood over the weekend and you see somebody who looks somewhat like me, maybe without the glasses,
say hi.
Come over and say hi. It'd be great to meet you.
I'll be in hiding all weekend. Have a great weekend, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.